In a time before the whispers of recorded history, when the mists of Ireland were thick with ancient magic and the very hills breathed with sleeping power, there lived a warrior named George. He was known as George of the Fen, for he was born in a small, humble village nestled on the edge of a vast, unforgiving bog. His home was a place of reeds and peat, where the sun fought to break through the perpetual haze and the ground beneath one's feet was as treacherous as any enemy. But it was here, in the land of whispering winds and strange iridescent pools, that George found his strength. His parents were peat cutters, their hands rough with honest labor. They taught him the value of hard work and the sacredness of the earth. From his father, he learned to walk the bogs without sinking, to read the signs of the land, and to respect the delicate balance of the wild. From his mother, he learned the old songs, the lullabies of the earth and the sky, which held power long forgotten by many. These songs were not for fighting, but for living, for coaxing life from the stubborn soil and bringing peace to a troubled heart. But a peaceful life was not to be George's fate. As he grew, so too did the tales of the creeping darkness that had begun to spread across the land. The old magic, once benign and woven into the fabric of daily life, had started to curdle. Creatures long confined to hidden places were stirring. Farmers found their livestock twisted into grotesque mockeries of themselves. Their crops withered overnight by an unseen blight. Children vanished from the edges of fields, and the laughter that once echoed through the villages was slowly replaced by a grim silence. It was this encroaching gloom that led George to the feet of Bran, the oldest druid in all of Ireland. Bran was a man carved from oak and time itself, his face a map of the land's sorrows and joys. His home was a ring of stones nestled deep within a whispering forest, and he was the last keeper of the most potent Celtic magic. He saw in George not just a boy from the fens, but a heart unburdened by fear, and a soul connected to the very rhythm of the land. "The old evils awaken," Bran had said, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "They have tasted the bitter fruit of our forgotten magic, and they hunger for more. You, George of the Fen, were born to face them. Your feet know the earth, your heart remembers the songs. You will be my spear, my shield, in a war the likes of which has not been seen in 1,000 years." Bran didn't teach him to fight with a sword, for a sword was a tool of men and conquest. Instead, he taught George to fight with a spear of yew wood, a sacred tree of life and death. He infused the wood with the land's own power, blessing it with a charm that would resonate with George's unique connection to the earth. This spear was not just a weapon, it was an extension of George's will, a conduit for the old pure magic of Ireland. The first great shadow to fall upon the land was that of the banshees of the Mourne Mountains. Their wails were not just sounds, but instruments of sorrow. They began as a faint, mournful cry carried on the wind, but with each passing day they grew stronger, more heartrending. They were whispers of future grief, a prophecy of loss that seeped into the very soul. The villages at the base of the mountains fell into a deep and profound despair. Fields went untended, children stopped playing, and men and women stared blankly into the distance, lost in a grief that was not yet their own. The banshees were not creatures of violence, but of emotional torment, and their power was all the more insidious for it. A young girl named Maeve, her eyes wide with a sorrow far too old for her, came to George's camp. "They're killing us, George," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're killing our hope. My father stares into the fire all day and does not see it burn. My mother sings no more." George felt a cold fury stir within him. This was not a physical foe he could simply run a spear through. This was a battle for the very spirit of the people. He rode north towards the Mourne Mountains, the banshees' cries a constant, terrible hum in the air. The mountains themselves seemed to weep, the rocks slick with a perpetual mystical dew. As he ascended, the cries became unbearable, a symphony of 1,000 heartbreaks that threatened to crush his own. He was assailed by visions of his loved ones dying, of his home swallowed by the bog. He stumbled, falling to his knees. The grief was so immense, so all-encompassing, that for a moment he believed it. He was ready to weep, to surrender to the sorrow. But then he remembered his mother's songs. He remembered the songs of the sun and the earth, the songs that coaxed life from the soil. He pulled himself up, his eyes now blazing with defiant purpose. He would not give them his tears. He would give them a song of his own. He stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the desolate valleys, where 3 ethereal figures, the banshees, floated and keened. Their faces were not visible, only their long, flowing hair and the silent agony of their forms. George took a deep breath and began to sing. His voice was not the wail of sorrow, but a resonant ballad of courage and defiant hope. It was a song of life and renewal, of the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Though shadows fall and sorrow calls, a light remains within these walls. Hope shall rise on morning skies and silence fear in lullabies. He sang of the warmth of a hearth fire, of the gentle hand of a loved one, of the first shoots of grass after a long winter. The banshees faltered. The very air around them shimmered with his powerful, heartfelt music. His song, infused with the pure magic of his soul, was anathema to their sorrow. They began to writhe, their spectral forms twisting as if in pain. They tried to intensify their wails, but George's song was stronger, drowning out their despair. With a final, silent scream of frustration, the banshees dissipated into the mist, their existence unmade by the power of hope. The mountains were silent once more. George, exhausted but triumphant, returned to the village where a profound peace had settled over the people. The laughter, so long absent, returned. The victory was not one of blood, but of spirit, and it earned George a legendary place in the hearts of the people. But peace was fleeting. A more insidious threat began to creep out of the dark woods. These were the Shadow Wolves, beasts not of flesh and blood, but of pure night. They were hunters of souls, not of sheep. They stalked the paths at the edge of the forest, and any traveler who looked upon them felt a creeping sense of dread, a chilling suspicion that turned neighbor against neighbor. The Shadow Wolves fed on the darkness in men's hearts. They whispered half-truths and half-lies, twisting them into accusations and grudges. The village, so recently united by their shared joy, began to fray. Friends argued over stolen crops that were never stolen. Lovers looked at each other with mistrust. The wolves were not physical hunters. They were weavers of discord, sowing hatred and fear. George, watching the community he had saved from sorrow now tear itself apart, felt a different kind of fury. This was a foe he could not simply sing away. He sought Bran's counsel. "They are made of shadows, George," Bran said, his ancient eyes seeing what George could not. "They are born from the darkness in men's minds. Your spear, forged for the physical world, cannot touch them." George felt a cold fear. "How do I fight something that is not there? How do I fight the darkness inside us?" "You must fight with the purest light," Bran replied. "You must cleanse the very air of their taint. There is a sacred well deep in the heart of the dark woods. Its waters are blessed by the old gods, and they hold the power to burn away the shadows. But the journey to it will test your very will." The journey was a trial in itself. George and Bran traveled together, the old druid's presence a beacon of calm in the growing dread. The woods were a labyrinth of gnarled trees and choking vines, and the Shadow Wolves were everywhere and nowhere. They were fleeting glimpses of darkness from the corner of George's eye, low growls that seemed to come from the shadows of his own mind. They were whispers of his own fears, doubts about his abilities, and dark questions about his purpose. George had to fight an enemy that was not there, yet was all too real. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a sacred well glowed with a faint ethereal light. Bran, weary from the journey, dipped a hand into the water. "The wolves are close, George. Their hunger for the light increases. You must dip your spear. The holy water will guide your hand. Do not strike to harm, but to cleanse. Sweep the sacred light through the darkness." The Shadow Wolves emerged from the trees, no longer indistinct shapes, but solid manifestations of fear and hatred. Their eyes glowed red, and their forms were a swirling vortex of pure night. They circled George and Bran, their snarls full of malevolent glee. George, with the glowing water-dipped spear in his hand, stood ready. As the wolves lunged, George did not dodge or retreat. Instead, he swept the spear in wide, powerful arcs. Trails of shimmering holy water flew through the air, and wherever they touched a wolf, there was a brilliant flash of light. The beasts recoiled, hissing and shrieking as their forms began to fray and burn. The light was anathema to them, a purifying flame that consumed their very existence. George fought with a graceful fury, his movements a dance of cleansing. With each sweep of the spear, a wolf would dissolve into nothingness until only the quiet rustling of leaves and the soft glow of the well remained. The Shadow Wolves were no more. George, victorious, watched as the forest seemed to take a deep, cleansing breath. The darkness receded, and with it the suspicion and fear that had plagued the village. When he returned, he saw friends embracing and families reunited. The light had returned to their hearts. But Bran's expression remained grim. "You have fought the sorrow and you have fought the hatred," the druid said, his voice heavy with ancient knowledge. "Now you must face the source of it all. The great darkness has a name. It has a heart, The ancient serpent has awakened. The serpent was the stuff of nightmares, a legend whispered by a few, believed by none. It had slept for 1,000 years, deep within a vast cold lake, a place the locals called the Whispering Lake. Its body was a river of emerald and gold, its scales harder than any stone, its eyes like burning coals. Its power was not just physical, but spiritual. It was a creature of corruption, a blight that withered the land and poisoned the minds of all who lived near its domain. The sky above the lake turned a sickly yellow. The water became thick and black, and the very ground around it died, turning into a desolate wasteland of cracked earth. This was no battle for a mere man and his yew spear. This was a war for the soul of Ireland itself. Bran prepared George for the ultimate battle. He taught him ancient chants of protection and power, hymns to the earth that would grant him strength and endurance. He spoke of the serpent's history. It was not just a creature, but a twisted echo of the first magic, a corruption that had seeped into the land at the dawn of time. To defeat it was not to kill it, but to unmake it, to cleanse its very existence from the land. George, now a seasoned warrior of magic and spirit, stood on the desolate shore of the Whispering Lake. He felt the serpent's presence, a suffocating weight of malice and decay that pressed down on him from all sides. Behind him, the villagers huddled together, their faces pale with terror. Maeve, now a young woman, stood at the front, holding a small stone given to her by Bran, a small prayer for his safety. The water of the lake began to churn violently. A colossal head, scaled in emerald and gold, rose from the depths, its eyes glowing with malevolent red light that seemed to burn a hole in the very air. The serpent's hiss was a storm of thunder and wind, a sound that shook the ground and made the villagers cry out in terror. Its sheer size was immense, its head alone towering over the tallest trees. Bran, standing at George's side, began a powerful incantation, a spell of binding that sought to contain the serpent's power. A shimmering barrier of pure light appeared, a shield forged from the old Celtic magic. The serpent lunged, its massive fangs tearing at the barrier, which began to crack and strain under the immense force. "Now, George," Bran shouted, his voice strained.
"It is our only chance."
George stood alone, his yew spear held high. It no longer just glowed. It pulsed with a vibrant emerald light that seemed to defy the darkness of the serpent. He began to chant, his voice clear and unwavering, a hymn of power and cleansing. "O earth, our mother, strong and deep, O sky above, your secrets keep with ancient power. How to make my plea vanish now and set us free." He did not wait for the barrier to fail. He ran forward, his feet a blur across the cracked earth. The serpent, sensing his defiance, turned its massive head towards him, its eyes burning with 1,000 years of hatred fixed on the lone warrior. It prepared to strike, but George was faster, his movements a graceful blur. He leapt onto a jagged rock at the water's edge, his form silhouetted against the colossal beast. The serpent lunged, its maw wide, its fangs like daggers. But George had seen its weak spot. Bran had taught him that even the most powerful evil has a flaw, a single point where its magic is thin, where it is still vulnerable to the pure light of the world. He had seen it in his vision during his training, a single unblemished scale just below the serpent's heart. With all his strength, with the power of the songs of his mother and the ancient magic of Bran, with the courage born of his home in the fens and his love for the land, George thrust the glowing spear forward. It was not a violent strike, but an act of pure will, a spiritual cleansing. The spear struck true. There was a blinding flash of emerald light that consumed everything. A sound, not a hiss or a roar, but a high-pitched, shattering shriek echoed through the air. The very magic of the serpent was unmade, unraveled by the pure light of George's spear. The beast's immense body crashed back into the lake, sending waves of black, foul-smelling water crashing against the shore. The water began to boil and hiss, the corruption of the serpent's essence dissolving as the old magic of Ireland reclaimed it. Silence fell. The sickly yellow sky above the lake began to clear, revealing a brilliant, vibrant blue. The ground around the lake, once dead and cracked, began to glow faintly with a renewed green life. The serpent unmade was no more. George, exhausted but alive, stood on the shore, the yew spear now a simple piece of wood in his hand. The villagers rushed forward, cheering and weeping with relief. Maeve ran to him, her eyes shining not with tears of sorrow but of joy. He was no longer just George of the Fen, the boy who fought the mists. He was George, the dragon slayer, the hero who had battled despair and hatred and the ancient corruption of the land itself. His name became a legend, a story told in song and firelight, a tale of a man who fought not with an army, but with a druid's magic, a fearless heart, and a love for the wild land of Ireland. And though he eventually passed into the mist himself, the people never forgot the man who saved them, leaving a legacy of courage and hope that would echo through the land for all time. The mists of Ireland remained, but they were no longer shadows of dread but veils of ancient mystery, waiting for the next hero to be born.